Well, good morning, Biology 30. Welcome to another day of online learning. Today's topic, we're going to look at sort of the hormonal control over the male reproductive system. Yesterday, we kind of went over the anatomy and the physiology, or the way that those different parts work. So today we're going to look at hormonal control over the reproductive system, a male reproductive system. Before we do that, I would just like to review with you. I gave you guys a couple of handouts yesterday of some parts to the male reproductive system. So let's just quickly review this. This is a side view, so starting at the top here. This is the ureter. This is just a tube that's going to drain urine from the bladder, from the kidneys into the bladder. So we have the ureter here. Right here, this structure here is the seminal vesicle, which we said adds a sugary solution to the sperm. Down here is our bladder, which stores urine. This label right here is this big long tube here, which we call the vas deferens. That's just a passageway for sperm out of the male body. This label here is another gland right underneath of the bladder here. That's the prostate gland, and that adds a milky alkaline or basic solution to the semen, to the sperm, to protect them from acids they might encounter, the sperm might encounter. This structure, this is the reproductive organ, the penis. The tube that runs right down the middle of the penis is, we said, the urethra. Don't worry too much about this label right here. Down here, this is just skin at the tip of the penis. This is called the foreskin. Over here, right at the bottom here, this label, this is the sac-like structure that supports the testis. This is called the scrotum. This, of course, is the gonad here. This produces sperm and testosterone for the male. That is the testis. Right over here, right underneath of the prostate gland, is the Cowper's gland. And, of course, that produces a mucus that's going to coat the urethra just prior to ejaculation. Now, this is a similar diagram. This one here is just a front view of the male reproductive system. So really quickly, right here is the ureter. Again, carries urine into the bladder. This is the vas deferens. Over here, this structure that sort of drapes over top of the testis, that is the epididymis, where the sperm are stored and where they mature, and this, of course, is the testis. Right up top here is the bladder. Over here is the seminal vesicle. Don't worry about this label right here. Right here is the prostate gland. Right down here is the Cowper's gland. And right here, this tube here is the urethra. And again, don't worry about this label over here. What this is a cross-section of the testis here. And as we learned yesterday, there's this tube in here that's all coiled up and packed into each testis. This is called the seminiferous tubule. And of course, over here, this is, again, the epididymis. Now, what this really is a cross-section of the penis. And so we can label some things on this. Over here, this would be the urethra. Right over here would be erectile tissue. This fills up with blood when the male is sexually aroused. So we'll just call this erectile tissue. And up here, we'll just call these blood vessels and nerves. Okay. So that's kind of what we did last day. We went through the male reproductive system, sort of the anatomy and the physiology of that. Today, what we're going to look at is hormonal control over that male reproductive system. Like most things in the reproductive system, both for males and females, it's highly regulated by hormones in the blood. So that's sort of going to be our topic for today. Now, there are a group of hormones which we call the gonadotropic hormones. Gonadotropic means gonad stimulating. The two gonadotropic hormones are what we call follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Now, we learned about those two hormones in our last unit on the endocrine system. They're collectively called the gonadotropic hormones, gonad stimulating, because that's what they're going to do. They're going to stimulate the male and female gonads, the ovaries and the testes. So let's talk first of all about FSH. FSH, as you know, stands for follicle stimulating hormone. It is released by the pituitary gland. And what it does in males, and today's topic is just for males, is it stimulates spermatogenesis. So FSH, when it's released by the pituitary gland, is going to stimulate the testes to produce sperm. Now, LH, the other gonadotropic hormone, it's also released by the pituitary gland, but it has a different function in males. It's going to stimulate specialized cells in the testes called interstitial cells to produce testosterone. So for males, what you should understand is FSH stimulates sperm production in the testes, whereas LH stimulates testosterone production, okay, by these interstitial cells that are in the testes. All right, so testosterone, again, we talked about this male sex hormone a little bit when we studied the endocrine system. We know that testosterone is produced by the testes. What we expect you to know now is specifically it's these interstitial cells in the testes that produce the testosterone. So LH stimulates specifically the interstitial cells in the testes to produce testosterone. So as you see, another function of testosterone, we know that it develops male secondary sex characteristics like facial hair, muscle development, lowering of the voice. But understand that testosterone is also very important in sperm production. Again, it stimulates the development of male secondary sex characteristics. Sex drive is highly dependent on levels of testosterone that are in the male bloodstream. And of course, it's an anabolic steroid. Testosterone does promote growth. So when a guy goes through puberty, there is an increase in testosterone production by the testes, and that also promotes growth. Now, I want to talk to you about a special type of cell that we find in the testes. They're called Sertoli cells, okay? And these Sertoli cells, where they're found, first of all, is they're found on the walls of the seminiferous tubules. So remember, the seminiferous tubules are all packed inside of the testes. Well, in the walls of those seminiferous tubules, there is a type of cell. It's a nurturing cell. And the role of these Sertoli cells is that they sort of surround and protect the developing sperm cells. So it's in the walls of the seminiferous tubules that the sperm are developing. But these Sertoli cells, they nurture, they release nutrient to those developing sperm cells, and they protect them from the man's immune system. So think of these Sertoli cells as protecting and a cell that nourishes the developing sperm. In this particular slide here, what we're trying to show you here, this is a cross section of one of those seminiferous tubules that are inside of the testis. Okay, so this is the hollow interior of one of those seminiferous tubules. And these are the walls of the seminiferous tubules. So these blue cells here, they're supposed to represent developing sperm at various stages of maturation. So these guys here, you can see that they're just about ready to be released into the lumen. And once they're released into this tube, they'll make their way towards the epididymis for further development. Okay, so this is the wall of your seminiferous tubule, and these blue cells represent sperms at various stages of maturation. Okay, Now, also inside of here are going to be um, your Sertoli cells. So if we jump over to this diagram, this is enlarged a little bit. And you can see this is the outside. Over here is sort of the outside of that seminiferous tubule. And as we move in here, we get to the end part. So you can see that we have a Sertoli cell sort of located right here. And this Sertoli cell, as you can see, sort of is surrounding this developing sperm. It's protecting it, and it's releasing nutrient to it. So understand that we have these sperm at various stages of development within the walls of the seminiferous tubule. And we have these supporting cells here called Sertoli cells. And again, their role is to protect and nourishing the developing sperm. Okay, now out here, these are sperm at their most immature stage, and they divide by meiosis, and eventually they produce sperm here that are pretty mature, and then they're released into the lumen, into this part, and they make their way to the epididymis for final maturation. But understand that these are these Sertoli cells, and they're found in the walls of the seminiferous tubules, and they protect and they nourish the developing sperm. Okay. You'll also notice on this diagram, if we go outside the seminiferous tubule, you can see surrounding the outside of the seminiferous tubule, there are these interstitial cells. And remember, their role is to produce testosterone. They're stimulated by LH, or luteinizing hormone, and they produce testosterone. The Sertoli cells, they're going to be stimulated by FSH, and their role is to produce a hormone called inhibin, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. Okay, so really important that you understand that is what those Sertoli cells. They're found in the walls of seminiferous tubules, and their role is to nourish and protect the developing sperm cells. Now, high levels of FSH in a man's bloodstream will stimulate those Sertoli cells to release the hormone inhibin. So this is a hormone that you should know about. When the pituitary gland is releasing FSH, it will stimulate those Sertoli cells to release a hormone called inhibin. Okay, and that inhibin has a role. We're going to see that it in fact inhibits the production of FSH by the pituitary gland. All right. Now, I'd like you to copy this title into your notes, Male Hormonal Control. And I'm going to give you a feedback diagram that I also want you to copy into your notes. So that feedback diagram is right here. So what I am going to ask you to do is to pause your podcast right now, and I would like you to copy this feedback diagram into your notebook. Okay, so now I'd just like to discuss what's going on here a little bit in this feedback diagram. So we have our hypothalamus up here. It produces a hormone signal called GnRF. Now, this stands for gonadotropic releasing factor. It's just a hormone that's produced by the hypothalamus. Sometimes you'll see it referred to as gonadotropic releasing hormone. What this is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus that's going to stimulate the pituitary gland to release the gonadotropic hormones, FSH and LH. So the pituitary or the hypothalamus releases GnRF. That in turn stimulates the pituitary gland to release FSH and LH into the bloodstream. So I'd like to talk about this half of the diagram first. So the pituitary gland, of course, releases FSH. That FSH is circulating in the blood, and it's going to stimulate those Sertoli cells. So remember that these Sertoli cells are in the walls of the seminiferous tubules, which are in the testes. The Sertoli cells then get stimulated by follicle-stimulating hormone, and two things result. Number one, the Sertoli cells are very active, and they become more active. They release more nutrient to the developing sperm. So these Sertoli cells becoming more active by FSH will in fact increase sperm production. So the walls of the seminiferous tubules will begin to increase more sperm. The other thing that happens is FSH will stimulate these Sertoli cells to release inhibin. So the Sertoli cells start to release more and more of this hormone called inhibin. And so the levels of inhibin in the man's bloodstream get higher and higher and higher. And inhibin inhibits, that's why we give it this name, the production of FSH. So actually rising levels of inhibin in the man's bloodstream provide negative feedback back to the pituitary for FSH. So as the levels of inhibin in the man's bloodstream get higher and higher and higher, and sperm production is increasing, that provides negative feedback back to the pituitary, which then lowers the production of FSH and slows down the activity of the Sertoli cells. So sperm production returns to normal, and we get normal levels of inhibin in the blood. Over here on this side of the diagram, the pituitary releases LH. LH stimulates those interstitial cells in the testes. They respond by producing more and more and more testosterone. So the rising levels of testosterone in the man's bloodstream provide negative feedback back to the pituitary gland for luteinizing hormone, for LH. So as the levels of testosterone in the man's bloodstream get higher and higher and higher, we get more and more negative feedback back to the pituitary gland for LH. The pituitary gland slows down the production of LH due to this negative feedback. The interstitial cells respond by producing less and less testosterone, and so testosterone levels get back to normal level. So in this diagram, what we can see is that FSH production is controlled by negative feedback through inhibin, and LH production is controlled by negative feedback through rising levels of testosterone. So that pretty much is our discussion of hormones in the male system, hormonal regulation. I'm going to give you a self-check that I would like you to do as part of your homework, which will basically be a review of what we covered yesterday on the male system and what we covered today on hormonal on the hormonal system. I'll give you the answers to that self-check tomorrow, and tomorrow we're going to get started on the female reproductive system. Stay well and take care.